Welcome to the Owner's Corner, where we're going to hear insights from Scott Tinsman and Hov Tinsman. I'm your host, Katie Hess. So, Hov, let's get started with you. Chemical season's around the corner, although today it's hard to believe that with as much snow on the ground here in eastern Iowa as we have. 2022, we were starting back into the supply being what I would call normal after COVID. What does 23 look like for you so far, and what does your crystal ball look like going into 24?
Yeah, there's no doubt. In 22, we saw a record amount of allocated products, supply challenges, partly post-COVID, partly transportation, partly lack of supplier forecasting. And I don't mean from the supplier standpoint, but from both farmers and retailers, basically forecasting what was going on. We saw basically 150 or thereabouts allocated products. For 23, that number looks like it's maybe been cut by a third. There's still quite a few. Most notably, most of the fungicides have some sort of an allocation hitch to it, and some soil insecticides as well, and that's more recent news. But the good news is there are other things that have come off allocation, like glufosinate, which is Liberty, or glyphosate, Roundup brands, as well as other things that are similar to Roundup brands.
Okay, what's your crystal ball look like for 24? Are you seeing anything yet?
Okay, so for 24, it looks a lot more favorable, that we might be getting back to what people might remember as being kind of pre-COVID normal. And even though we're not sure what that looks like, it's a lot more comfortable that forecasting would not be as much as a premium. But as an example, in 22, had there not been forecasting done by most of our sales team talking directly to you, we would have been shorted the fungicide potential inventory by something in the neighborhood of 25%. But because there was forecasting, people could make last-minute decisions as soon as VT or V10, and we had the product available. So for you, the benefit is we can have the supply as long as you're basically communicating what your intentions are. That doesn't mean you have to pay for it. It just means you have to tell us what your intentions are, and then that gives us time to try to secure the product, which we can never do just in time, because those are all allocated products at the moment.
Okay, you just mentioned allocated products. Is there anything else on that list besides fungicides that you're seeing today?
Yeah, soil insecticides and smart boxes are really challenged, and that's basically one of the main inert ingredients that goes into fungicide or into insecticides has been shorted. So anything that's got a smart box, you might be limited in terms of what product you could use. Now, there is still counter lock and load, or there's still counter and smart boxes available. There's also Smart Choice, and furthermore, there's also Force. But in terms of Aztec in smart boxes, that's going to be more potentially challenged.
Okay, Hov, we also mentioned in soil insecticides, you've got a new product on the market called Nerisma. Can you just briefly talk about that? It's a BASF product, I believe.
Yeah, it is brand new. We've had a very nice potential supply available, so we can get it out for the first year. We see a lot more, partly due to the warm weather of the winter, partly due to traits being overwhelmed by insects. We are expecting insecticide interest to peak significantly higher than it has been in the last 4 or 5 years. Nerisma is a new insecticide that you can add to a liquid starter, and it seems to have some very strong support, and we're going to give it a shot. We have a limited supply, but yet we're going to make sure it gets out. For those of you that are interested, make sure you make contact with your direct Liqui-Grow salesperson.
Oh, I said Liberty. Is there anything else on that?
Well, Liberty is more significantly available for 23 compared to 22 or 21. Certainly Roundup is another option that it's a lot more available, or there's generic glyphosates as well. That's in a much better position than it was a year ago at this time.
Have I talked to a lot of farmers throughout the year, and something that I hear more of every year is hot loads. Are there any facilities at Liqui-Grow that can handle hot loads, and what do you suggest farmers should do?
Excellent question. We have tried to become more adapted and speed up the process so that you can basically pull into a Liqui-Grow location and actually get your load, assuming you have your own truck. We have made changes so that you can have direct load out and not have to go through the mixing system. We are more prepared than we have been in previous years, but you need to basically make sure that you've contacted that location sales rep and get yourself in line. Now, I can't promise you that you still wouldn't wait in line when you show up, but with some pre-planning and being able to tell people ahead of time, we should be able to get you in and out quickly. We have sped up the process to have what's called direct loadout, so that we're not going through our overheads, creating foam. It goes just directly bottom load, and away you go.
You know, I love hot loads, especially as you think back to 2019 and the spring that we had there. A lot of people had their products in their own shed, and then once we had that wet spring, we had to do some changing. And, you know, that's nice. We could do the changing for you, and all you have to do is bring the semi in. So I personally think seems easier for me, I guess. Anything else on the chemical side before we switch over to Scott?
No, I think the only thing I would mention, and this has more to do with fungicide, I'm kind of reiterating, beating the same drum, but if you think you're going to be intending to use fungicide, whether it's to take care of tar spot, which we expect to have a bigger presence in 23 than it did in 22, and it was much bigger in 22 than in 21, please make sure that you're letting your Liqui-Grow contact know exactly what your intentions are. That does not mean you have to pay for it. I want to emphasize that, but it is important that we know what your intentions are, whether you're looking at hitting it one shot at a VT to R3 stage, or basically twice by hitting it at a V5 and then again at R2 or 3. Make sure we at least know what your intentions are, because without that, we're going to potentially struggle to have the supply that you want when you need it in mid-July.
Okay, so Scott, let's switch over to the fertilizer.
Well, let's go backwards just a second. Obviously, we all know fertilizer has been extremely volatile these last 12 to 18 months. You know, if you go back, I think a lot of people did not give a lot of credit to fertilizer. You know, it was sort of a bit player in the world of business. You know, when you consider 98% of the population doesn't farm, you know, it's easy to forget about fertilizer, especially in the United States, where 90% of it is consumed elsewhere in the world. But I think the last 12 months, since the war started over in the Ukraine by Russia, we found out just how closely interconnected everything is in the world. I mean, first Russia says we're not going to give natural gas to Europe. Okay, that means we need to supply natural gas from the United States, which drove up natural gas prices and consequently contributed to driving up fertilizer prices. You know, then you've got Russian potash that was probably sanctioned. Belarus was sanctioned. That needs to find a different home than coming to the West. So, you know, that's getting itself solved now by rail internal into China and India, and maybe up into some of the Baltic North Sea ports. You look at China, and China recognizes that, okay, this war's going on and fertilizer could be problematic. And so they say, we're going to stop all exports. Well, they're a third of the phosphate production, and they have significant nitrogen production also. So, you know, Russia's got a third of the potash, China's got a third of the phosphate and a large portion of nitrogen. So now you've created a little bit of a supply constraint. Well, that drove, obviously, prices up because of the limited supply. You know, then you start talking about whether spot shortages of food or potential spot shortages of food. Well, that goes to food inflation. And, you know, you just have this thing compounding upon itself, left and right. Now, the fortunate thing is we are beginning to see prices come down. You know, will they come down further? Yes, I think there's a chance they will. We'll see how that plays out over the next 90 days. I think there'll probably be prices in the July, August, early September timeframe that the farm is going to want to take a look at and then make decisions. Does this make sense for their operation? Today, as we stand today, I feel like we have 90 or 92% of the fertilizer at the farm gate level already committed, whether it was put on last fall or whether it's been prepaid for this spring. You know, most of 23's fertilizer is probably done.
Okay. For the guys that locked in and paid for nitrogen and P&K in first part of September, January 10th pricing was is it still a good move to have it locked in early, or did it not make a lot of jumps? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, there was a significant jump between August and January 1st. And quite frankly, there's been a significant jump at least 8 out of the last 10 years between that time frame. The challenge is, what we found is a huge number of farmers have converted to paying for it before Labor Day weekend. If you had told me this was going to happen 10 years ago, I would never have believed you. 10 years ago, we probably had less than 5% of the nitrogen purchased before Labor Day weekend. This year, I think it was well over 60 or 65%. So we've seen an entire paradigm shift. Now, I'll be honest with you. Twin State and a lot of the large players in the fertilizer industry have all recognized this for the last couple decades. And so we all try to get our fair share at the day prices come out. And quite frankly, it works out 9 out of every 10 years. You know, some years it will go down. We saw that in 2009. This year it's softening, but we're not back down to prices to where they were, you know, at the back in August and September. So no, I think it's always important to look at what type of prices are surfacing in late summer.
Okay, I often get the question, well, if all these large retailers would just wait till January or February to buy, we would have these better prices. So what do you say to that?
You have to look at the reality of the situation. You know, Twin State's large in some people's mind. I mean, we need to buy 80, 100,000 tons in the course of a year. We've got 75,000 tons of storage that has to be filled before April 1st. You know, the reality is, you know, that's 3,500 semi-truck loads. You cannot wait until January 15th to ship that product in and think you're going to have 3,500 semi-loads go to our 10 or 12 different locations and get everybody filled up in that time frame. So CHS, Land O'Lakes, Growmark, you know, we're all in Nutrient, we're Helena, we're all in the same exact position. We can't afford to wait. We all have to start buying in the summer, but you know, now the problem is we have a hard enough time buying everything that we want early because we have more farmers buying than what sometimes the supplier wants to sell us. And that was a problem we've seen the last 2 years where the farm gate has come in and said, hey, we want to pay before September 1st. And we've had a real challenge getting enough tons available to allow everybody to buy everything they want to buy.
Additionally, Katie, Scott's been trying to buy single amounts in the summer. In the last 4 out of the last 5 years, it's been impossible to buy what he wants to buy. I mean, basically, if he wants to buy 10 of something, the supplier's willing to sell 2 of something. And therefore, it makes it very challenging to basically have yourself supplied when you want it.
Well, today is not a day that you'd want to have to ship 3,500 loads, that's for sure, here in Eastern Iowa. So,
No.
I'm not sure. I was looking at this message coming in from a farmer here. Did you talk on natural gas yet in Europe on how that affects the fertilizer markets?
Well, no, that's a good question. I didn't specifically talk about it, but obviously when we started the war, the Russians, in an attempt to squeeze the allies in Europe, they essentially cut off natural gas going to Europe. Well, they didn't totally cut it off, but they restricted supply so much that the price went up over $100 an MMBTU. Well, that forced all the nitrogen plants to shut down. They could not afford to make nitrogen. Now that natural gas is come back to level, you know, in the United States, we hit $10 back in July and August. It's now down to, this morning it was $2.64, I think, at Henry Hub, Board of Trade. Europe is down under 20, I think, or under 25. That is allowing some of their nitrogen to come back online. That has created a situation where we weren't sending all of our natural gas and all of our nitrogen from Donaldsonville over to Europe, and the market's beginning to balance itself out. The prices are beginning to come back to a more realistic level. Do they have further to fall? right now, I think definitely at the retail level, they'll start falling once we get to the 4th of July and people can figure out what their costs are to fill up, late summer and early fall.
So look for pricing for nitrogen somewhere in that late summer after the 4th of July time frame.
Yeah. The big fertilizer conferences between the suppliers and the large retailers tend to occur in the middle or 3rd week of July. A lot of times prices are not set until after that conference because that conference tends to be where some of the buying occurs or a good portion of the buying occurs, or everybody's kicking tires and the suppliers are kicking tires to find out how desperate the retailer is to buy. And obviously if the retailers are begging for product, then the supplier thinks, hey, the price is going up, the price is going up. It's a funny thing. Farmer calls us and says, hey, I want to buy nitrogen. Okay, we need to go buy nitrogen. We call the supplier, we need to buy nitrogen. Well, if the farmer goes to two or three people call the supplier, and the supplier goes, hey, prices are really strong, let's raise our price. And then we'll give them a price. So, it's a funny situation, but it's an interesting circle.
That is interesting when you put it that way, Scott. Sulfur tends to follow the markets of nitrogen. Are you seeing anything in the sulfur market right now? We've really got a strong demand for it at what I call the shop door. I don't call it a farm gate anymore. I call it the shop door. Do you see anything in sulfur?
Well, sulfur's been strong. There's no doubt demand has been increasing dramatically over the last decade. I am very comfortable with the state of Iowa and northern Illinois' supply of sulfur. I think, there's 4 manufacturers now sort of operating in those territories, and I feel very comfortable that if we need the sulfur, if the farmer needs the sulfur, we'll be able to purchase it. It has softened a little bit, but I think it probably will be a different scale next year also. I mean, again, a lot of the materials for this spring have already been purchased and locked and loaded, so you may not see dramatic changes at the retail level. Those will tend to come after the 4th of July.
And Katie, we've already seen compared to last summer, sulfur probably decreased by about $100 a ton to the farmer.
Okay, so this is a question off the cuff. If a farmer wants to apply his own sulfur, are we able to ship semi-loads or larger quantities of sulfur to the farm?
Well, the answer to the question is sort of a yes and no. Assuming the farmer has his own tank for storage and he's got his own liquid applicator
and containment,
then yeah, that's possible. It probably makes more sense. I don't know that many farmers that take semi-truckloads of sulfur. Probably makes more sense for him to stop into his local Liqui-Grow dealership and pick up 1,600 gallons or 2,500 gallons from their tank versus coming in and asking Durant or Hampton or Janesville to ship it.
So what I'm hearing is basically we need to work on that ahead of time.
Yes, absolutely, from that standpoint.
So we said we'd keep this between 15 and 20 minutes. Is there anything else? Well, one thing I did want to talk on here, I made a quick note here. You were just talking about your suppliers, and it appears that when I see you guys up and down the hallway, you guys have really good relationships with your suppliers. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, that's been a philosophy that our fathers taught us, during their tenure, and we're 65 years into it, is, in this world, you need to have partnerships, both with your customers and with our suppliers. And we have found over the course of time that that's where it pays dividends, because there's always going to be hiccups. And the point is, when there's hiccups, people take care of their closest friends and partners, is I guess the short version of my opinion.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Keeping the partnerships strong and the connection so that it's a two-way street, not a one-way street. We're not just a lackey that basically buys. It's as much, we want predictability, the supplier wants predictability, and we want to have that connection. And we don't need to necessarily call in favors every year, but when things get really challenging, that's when we need to call it in.
I mean, Katie, we've had the same phosphate supplier for 65 years. We've had the same potash supplier for 40 years.
I think that's single source. That's longer than my grandparents have been married.
I mean,
And by the way, that's older than us.
and I mean, that's single source. So, nitrogen, because of the different terminals, we have 2 or 3 suppliers on nitrogen, but the reality is we're very much focused on, a strong partnership both up and down the chain.
Well, thanks. I think that's a great point to end on today. And I hope you guys have a good spring. Hopefully you're enjoying your snow day today. And we will be doing another one of these late summer. Thanks.
Hey, Katie, the drought is almost over. The drought and throughout the whole Liqui-Grow trade territory is nearly over. So things are going to look up and up for the 23 crop.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Hey, guys. Bye-bye.